Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the College of Health Sciences Doctoral Academy, which again, I will emphasize is not only for the College of Health Sciences, it's for anybody who'd like to attend. And it's also not only for doctoral students, it's for any postgraduate student or aspiring doctoral student to attend. While we give other people a few minutes to enter, won't you please let us know in the chat box where you are from? Let's take 30 seconds. Let us know where you're from. If you're in a different country, let us know which other country you're in. Oh, we got somebody from Nigeria, Kenya, Namibia, Switzerland. Wow. The Kingdom of Lesotho, Mozambique, Ghana. Ah, there is a South African, another person from Lesotho, another Nigeria, and a local. Wonderful. Thank you for that. In the interest of sticking to time, I'm going to introduce our speaker today. But just to give you some background on the topic, it's been one of my priorities to expand medical research specifically from just quantitative research. There's so much more that we can learn if we apply different research techniques. We ask this question slightly differently, and we can get information that will inform further quantitative work. And I've been able to show through many of my own PhDs that the qualitative studies that they have done have informed the quantitative work, or the other way around, the quantitative work has informed the questions to ask in the qualitative work. And so I'm going to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Professor Naina Amin, who's from our School of Education in the College of Humanities. Naina has supervised PhDs in the medical school before, so she does know about how medical students can use qualitative research. But just to give you a picture of who Naina is, she's a professor in curriculum studies at the university. She's also a university distinguished teacher and an NRF researcher. She's here at our university. She's currently the leader of research and the chair of the Higher Degrees Committee. And she has edited several chapters and journals over several years. She's graduated 13 PhDs and 18 master's students over the past 11 years, and she's currently supervising a cohort of 13 PhD students and 7 masters in education students. So, Naina, thank you once again for coming to share your wisdom with us. And I'm hoping that it's going to stimulate some conversation and get people to ask questions beyond what can just be described with numbers. So Naina, I'm going to hand over to you directly. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Most of it is fiction from a particular perspective when we deal with paradigms, as you will know. And so welcome to the world of research and research paradigms in particular. I've been teaching this topic for about 10 years, but there's still so much to learn on a daily basis because there are thousands of paradigms and new ones are emerging all the time. But today we're only going to deal with 3, because I think if you have an idea of what a paradigm is, you will be able to understand others. Of course, they do become more complex. But I think the 3 that I will be introducing you to are I would say, the most popular, or the ones that I use quite regularly. So let's just start off by understanding that we live in a world which we inhabit. And in this world, is where we find our problems that we want to research. And when we want to understand it from a research perspective, we have to enter the world of science. And so that's what I'm going to, and it starts off here with the paradigm. So today is all about paradigms. If you just give me an opportunity to move over to a PowerPoint. Okay, is it clear there? I'm always scared
Yes, we can see it.
I'm always scared to move to PowerPoint. Let me just see if I can get that out of the way. Oh gosh, that's at the bottom and expand this, but okay. And let me reduce that. So let's try to get to grips with what a research paradigm or paradigms are all about, because it's certainly more than one. So let me start off in something I think that's gone around. Maybe it's a bit of a joke, just to give you an example. So this is the house that you own, and this is how you view its value and its worth. But the person who wants to buy it sees it as a small cabin that perhaps is not worth very much. Okay, and now the bank that is going to finance this sees it as somebody's backyard property, perhaps not even worth financing. And your appraiser comes and wants to reduce it to the bare minimum, to just some structural tops and sides. And of course, the government needs to make money, so it will charge you as if it is worth a castle. And the house actually is this. So how is it possible that you have something like this and one person can see it like that and another like that and the owner like that? What drives it? And here we can see that all of them are driven by one particular kind of perspective, a worldview, and that it's the relationship of a building to its economic value. And so that in a way becomes sort of a paradigm in which everything you see either has monetary worth or not. Fortunately, in research, we're not that small-minded, I think. But it does hint to something. If you look at the assessor or the appraiser or the potential buyer and the seller, each one is looking from a particular perspective where they are located, just like this fishbowl, in which one of the fish remarks, there goes the world's largest fish, because the only world they know is a fishbowl. So a worldview is a view of where you are in the world and not the world as it is. And I think this is a very important point in order to understand the notion of a paradigm. I'm leading up to where we're going, so please don't be concerned. And you can see that the worldview has a particular bias. So whatever interests you, whatever is your passion, will show up not quite as consciously or explicitly as this rhino's paintings, but it certainly is there. And a discerning reader would be able to pick up the bias or the worldview of a researcher. And that's okay. There's no research without bias. The only difference is that in the world of research where I come from, we make explicit the choices we make about how we view the world, how we wish to study the world, how we wish to explain what is happening in the world. We make this explicit. So for a long time in the medical and in the hard sciences, really, there was an accepted idea of what this world is, what truth is, what constitutes reality, what constitutes good research questions, and how you can represent that, and what kind of inferences one can make of it, and what makes it valid and invalid. So there was this shared consensus around research, what it is and what is not. So there's never really been a direct motivation or an obligation to divulge or make explicit your worldview. But as you move into where the social sciences are, and because there are so many choices, you have to justify your choice. You have to justify what are the assumptions that you're bringing in. We're not assuming that the world is round, because some of us believe the world is flat. So it's that kind of idea that is behind this notion that a paradigm has to be made explicit and shared. So other researchers can enter your world and view it from where you are, or they can step outside your world and critique you and say, you have blind spots because of where you are. And this is what we are seeing as well. And that is the way critique operates. But good critique always recognizes the positionality of the researcher and tries to make sense of it from there, and then to offer construction that will make it more coherent, more appropriate, more relevant, and so on, unless there's a special challenge, and then you have what might be a paradigm war. We can see that from what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. And there are 2 points. The one is about Russian, colonization, moving into the spaces of the Ukrainians. From the Russian side, it's actually European expansionism by moving NATO, or for NATO to try to get more in line with countries that border Russia. So there are 2 narratives, and how we make sense of it depends on the paradigm that we are in. So what are paradigms really? We know it's a term that was coined by Thomas Kuhn, and it had to do with how you view the world at a certain point in history. There was a time in history when Earth was regarded as the center of the universe, and then there was a shift where they recognized that the sun is the center of the universe. And today we know that the center of the universe it's not just one universe. There are many universes. So our sun might not be the center of all universes. But other names for it are paradigm, a model, worldview, groupthink, a mindset, a perspective, universalis thesis, which is the universal formal system. So the conventional method of doing science, and of course, habits of reasoning. So these are some notions, if you can think about it in one of these words, because, oh gosh, I just picked up that I spelled paradigm incorrectly, but maybe that's a paradigm shift too. We're seeing spelling undergoing a lot of changes nowadays. So I think that when you're a researcher and you wish to communicate in a way that is understandable by your reader and your audience, that you would stray away from some of the jargon, like the word paradigm, and use words that are more meaningful to others. But that's just my perspective. There are people who insist. A good use of it in a thesis is where you mention it, but then you can explain it in other ways as well, demonstrating that you have an understanding of what you mean, of all the notions, terms, concepts that you use. can't seem to move this thing. Okay, so there are certain concepts that are associated with paradigms, and these are the four main ones. And the ones that I teach in the research discourses, we expend it far more, but I don't think it's necessary for today's seminar. The first is epistemology. Well, it's not first, it's just in the order in which it's written here. Epistemology is one of the concepts. And epistemology is not a fancy term for knowledge. Let me just make that absolutely clear. It's not a synonym for knowledge. Epistemology is the knowledge that you produce. How did you know about it? How did you come to know about it? And it's underpinned by the question of, how do I know what I know? That means, what are the sources of the knowledge? What was my relationship with those sources? How did I put it together? That's what epistemology is. Knowledge is just the end product. It's not epistemology. Ontology is this lovely word which means the nature of reality. Methodology is the means of producing data for knowledge. And then axiology is around ethics, morality, and truth. So these are the four concepts that are attached to the notion of paradigm in research. In business, in education, Department of Education, and all of them, they use the word paradigm as if it's just a model, because they really do not go into these four concepts at all, right? So just to say that there is an everyday use of the word paradigm, but there's also a scientific use of the word paradigm. Some examples of paradigms that are used in science: positivism, interpretivism, or hermeneutics, critical theory, feminism, modernism, post-structuralism, postmodernism, posthumanism, and there's a whole range more that I've not even put down here, like structuralism and so on. So these are just a few, but I'm only going to deal, as I said, with three, and that is positivism, interpretivism, and feminism for today. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to switch to another what you call it, another presentation. Let me just see if I can see if it's here. Give me a moment, please.
While you're doing that, Nana, would you agree that most of the research that we do in the medical sciences falls under the positivist paradigm?
It does. But so maybe we can chat about it, what you call it, towards the end of the presentation, because I think positivism is getting a bad reputation, which is not deserving of it. But we can discuss that later, because I think it's a very important paradigm that has brought tremendous benefits to humankind, to the planet, and so on, in so many ways. And I think it's a particular South African, what you call it, passion to focus too much on the individual. And that is really messing up some aspects. But the best way to put it is that, you know, if they work together, they work really well for everyone. So in paradigms, the way, and I'm going to do it across, I don't know whether to do it across or to go down, but I think let's do it across, almost as comparisons. So
sorry, Nana, have you got a new slide up? I don't think
I not put it up. I'm so sorry.
I think no, it might be that there's something wrong in the system, because I still have the old slide rather squiffed.
No.
How's everybody else seeing it?
No, let me, I didn't remove the old one, sorry.
Okay.
Now where's this damn thing gone to? Is it here? Yes. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes, that's clear.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry.
Thanks.
I was trying to keep the old one because I'm going to go back to it, but that's fine. It shouldn't take a minute or two more. So every paradigm, there's a reason for the research. So a reason underpins why you're selecting a particular paradigm. So a paradigm is not your particular worldview about how you wish to lead your life. Some people are very good. They can match their research paradigm and their living paradigm. It doesn't work for everyone. What's nice is that if you leave it as an option, you may change your paradigm according to your research strategy or your motivation. If you wish to do prediction, like how long will it take before COVID-19 runs its course, then a positivist approach might be useful. If you want to understand what COVID-19 does to people's lives, those that have been infected by it and survived it, then you might go to the interpretivist one in order to understand and describe what they've gone through and their experiences. If you wish to know whether COVID-19 was more oppressive and marginalized women even more, then you would choose the feminist paradigm. So it depends whether you want to empower, you want to understand, or you want to predict. I should also just add a little caveat at this point. We do have something called critical positivism and critical interpretivism. So those hybrid paradigms as well. But just to keep it simple for understanding, I'm just doing the bare minimum. Because I think once you mastered the understanding of it, then you can go towards more hybrid paradigms. And these lines that are separating them are really for understanding here, but really there shouldn't be one because there is some kind of merging in some areas and so on. So the reason for positivism is to discover natural laws so people can predict and control events. The interpretivism is to understand and describe, and the feminist one, if you're going into a particular kind, I should call it critical feminism, is to empower and radically change women socially, personally, and politically. So it might mean that the work that we do with women and COVID-19 is to help them overcome the marginalization and so on. So what is this, the nature of social reality ontology? In the positivist paradigm, reality is objective and it can be found. If you can't find it, it means that you still have not developed the instrument to find it. But when you do, you will be able to. If you just think about the progression from magnifying glasses to the kinds of telescopes that we have today, each iteration and each change allowed you to see more and more and more. And the kinds of things we are able to see today, which we could never do with the naked eye, we may use instruments to do that. So in the positivists, the only limitation to reality is the lack of instruments to measure, to see, to observe, and so on. For the interpretivists, reality is subjective and constructive. So there is this idea that my reality is different to yours, and I can construct my reality differently to yours. And we do that mainly through the use of words. And we see that very clearly in those images I showed you at the beginning, how subjective it is to an appraiser or to the bank or to the rates department about how they construct the worth and the wealth associated with a material object. For if you're in the feminist, reality is not what is. It is what is socially constructed to oppress and to regulate women. So if you take the certain structures like the church, how women must dress to church is to regulate them and to oppress them. If you think about how a woman in some countries never reach the point where they are in the charge of their own lives. They're either a daughter, a wife, a sister, or a daughter-in-law. They can never assume majority ownership over their own lives. It's always for someone else. But those were not natural. They were not founded when the Big Bang took place. I believe even that is under reconsideration. But the idea is that these are constructed to oppress women. The idea that reality is objective and is found, the found part we can understand. But the idea that it is objective is also under scrutiny. And you see this constantly when we shift the way we describe an event, how we reinterpret it over the years using so-called objective methods and modes. And so objectivity is in the mind of the observer and also in the mind of the researcher. And we can talk about that a little while after I do my presentation. The nature of truth. If you're a positivist, there is one truth, and that truth can be discovered. So we all know what the heart is. We know exactly where it is positioned in the body. We know what are the structures of it. And it's really hard for anyone to discover another kind of heart. Maybe there is, we really don't know. What has been discovered is just that sometimes a heart is positioned slightly differently. But in all aspects is that you can discover it. For the interpretivers, truth is many. Whose truth do I believe? Do I believe the Ukrainians, or do I believe the Russians? Do I believe the Europeans or the NATO allies? There's so many. And the objective here is to understand everyone's truth. It's not to adjudicate and say, well, I looked at the four and I'm choosing this one. That's not it. It is, these are the four. This is how we understand. And this is how the four together show us the complexity of this phenomenon that is taking place at the moment. So truth is many. And in the feminist one, truth is many, but it can only be found in women's experiences. So I don't believe a man. Anything a man says can be denied, it's not true, and so on. So if you want to know what truth is about women's experiences, about their lives, about their struggles, you ask the women. The nature of discourse, it's not as simple as I'm saying, please, when you're doing the research, there's so much justification and data and so on that needs to be done. This is just to understand how the paradigm guides you. The nature of discourse. In the positivist paradigm, it's very structured. So if you are undertaking a survey, it's identically worded for every person in the sample population, right? So if you're sending it out to 5,000, you don't have different versions of this instrument. It's identical, it goes out. In the interpretivist one, it's more dialogic. It's more like a conversation that you're having. I might ask participants different questions because each one's experiences allows me to probe it differently. So the one who survived COVID with minimal complications, as opposed to somebody who now has long COVID, the conversations will be very different in terms of the data that I'm going to produce. So the discourse is more dialogic. Whereas in the feminists, everything is gendered. And so you will find much more he's and him and her, and women and men and masculinity and toxic masculinity and so on. So the discourse is very, very gendered. And when the discourse is structured, I think there also is an element in positivism to be a little bit more neutral in the communication, in the nature of the discourse. When we come to communication, that is after the research is completed, for positivists, it's like, I'm the researcher, I've done the work, I have determined these are the findings, and I now transmit it because I've closely met validity criteria, and all of that, so on. So it is transmitted from the perspective of the researcher in terms of how the research was done to meet the brief that was set up. With your interpretivism, it's much more of a transaction. So the researcher is more likely to consult the participants in the findings and how that must be communicated. What will be communicated, what will not be, what will be taken out even after the study is completed. So participants have rights right until the closure of the study to change their data, to ask you to remove certain data, to ask you to add certain data, and so on. So it's a different ballgame. But if it's in the interest of understanding, then that's what you are enabled to do. In the feminist paradigm, it's very transgressive. They're pushing against the margins of conformity, of politics, of race, of gender, of class, or whatever it is. And the communication is almost bordering on aggression in order to make the point about women's suffering and so on. So what kind of knowledge will we produce, which is epistemology? What and how we know? So if you're in the positivist, you look at what is true, and then how can you know about it? And you can see here that if you don't know its truth value, you might not even pursue that as a research project. Or you might undertake it to prove a particular kind of truth. So there's two ways to look at that. Whereas in the interpretivist paradigm, it's like, what can we understand? So I'm going to undertake research about any kind of phenomena that I wish to understand. And in the feminist paradigm is, we're looking for problems that work against women, and what must we do? So the end of that project means that we must have some action that must be taken, that can be implemented. In the interpretivist paradigm, we don't have to take any kind of action unless it's a critical interpretivist paradigm. So if you look at these, there's certain kinds of continua that go across. And of course there are more, but because I did not include the other paradigms. So we're moving from realism to relativism. The real, this is the real thing, to no, it's real because I see it in this way. We're moving from universalism to particularism, from invariantism to contextualism, and then from consensus to perhaps antagonism. So in a nutshell, that is the paradigms. And then I wanted to do, but I think let me deal with the questions first before I go to the last little example about how if you view it to different paradigms, you would come to different conclusions. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Colleen.
Okay, keep your Zoom on, your video.
Yes.
There was one question that came up just now, and she's asked
Sorry,
where...
do you want me to get out of stop share?
Yeah, you can stop share, then we can
Okay,
see you across the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a question from Gloria. She asked, where does constructivism fall? You know, I know about the constructivist theory in science education. Is constructivism a paradigm?
Yes, it is. And it's one of those that I haven't touched on. And again, constructivism could be from an interpretivist point of view. It could be from a feminist point of view. It could be from a critical point of view. But certainly it falls in with what I would say the post-positivist paradigms. So positivism is the one that stands out. And on the other end, the one that stands out is the post-humanism, which I'm not even going to touch over there.
Yeah, I think what we must try and do for our audience is that they're mainly clinicians and health scientists. So we should look at what paradigms they would use, for example. There's another question here. Is feminist independent, or it taps into positivism and interpretivism? I think Ntabi Singh is getting it, that there are these gray lines between the paradigms.
Yeah, but I think the important thing is to declare it, because there are feminists that work in the positivist paradigm. And there are feminists that also work in the interpretivist paradigm. And then, of course, their communication mode changes from transgressive to the entire dialogic or very structured and so on. So when the hybrids come in, they are influenced by both sides, you know, whichever one that they take on. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any more questions from the floor? Just as an example, over the last couple of years, I was involved in some research on men's experiences of pain. And just to put that to our audience, what would you think that I would have been using? I was working with Dr. Blackbeard, so I'm not going to tell you where he comes from. How do you think, if I was going to look at men's experiences of pain, and I'll tell you where my interest came from. It's that when my father had a heart attack many years ago now, he was given a little scale with little faces on from 1 to 10 and asked where his pain was. And there was a nurse looking after him, and he really didn't want her to think he was some wuss. So he said his pain threshold was somewhere, you know, like it wasn't nearly as bad as what he was actually experiencing. So even in his incredible pain, he was having a heart attack, his masculinity made him answer something that wasn't actually true. And so how does it make sense then to use that scale? So that is where my interest in men's experiences of pain came from. So just to the audience, how would you think we would handle this? How would you think we should actually research men's experiences of pain? Naina, I think that maybe people are just feeling a little intimidated. Maybe you can.
Maybe I can start.
Yeah.
So I think the good thing about the example you gave is I would use that instrument that was used and then show its limitations and perhaps its inappropriateness. So it's one way to use it too. But the other is, of course, I haven't dealt with masculinities as a paradigm. And I do that deliberately because I'm a feminist. So I just ignore that. I just don't declare that. I don't share it with anybody. But no, it does exist. But you could have done this with interpretivism, you know, and certainly then brought out the pain to get to a deeper understanding. And then maybe critical interpretivism to show how the norms of society prevent men from expressing their vulnerable, sensitive sides. It's oppressive. And we're seeing this in the war, you know, in which young boys are placed at the forefront, having to give up their lives, and the fears and the pain and they're not allowed to talk about it. They can't express it. But if we did that, perhaps we'll have fewer wars in the world.
Yeah, I think I'd like to make a point to the audience that a feminist does not have to be somebody who shows no empathy towards the masculine. Yeah, I'm not a feminist. And so
Yeah, I'm a part-time feminist. And it suits me. I still want somebody to open the door for me, buy me gifts, and so on. Yeah. So,
so what we did was we approached men who attend a chronic pain clinic, and we got psychologists to perform a survey where there were open-ended questionnaires. The men were encouraged to just spill out the beans and just talk and talk and talk. We had certain questions like, what does your chronic pain mean in your home? You know, many people lost their jobs because of the pain, etc. And so we were able to get so much richness out of doing a thematic analysis on those interviews. So it was interpretivism. Yes, so those people who were talking interpretivism.
I think the good thing about a paradigm is that it forces you to think very deeply about the research that you're doing. Because as you were speaking, I just thought, I wouldn't have asked psychologists to work with the men, depending on their ages. So maybe I would have chosen slightly younger men who all had a living mother. And ask the mothers to interview.
Yeah.
Because that's the one place that they possibly could, not all, but they possibly could show some sensitivity, you know.
Absolutely.
And then you could also compare it to what they would tell their wives. So, you know, so you get this deeper kind of understanding. But you can see, even the study you did yielded powerful information. So what happens is that then the ideas for the next person is to say, maybe I should change who does that, and, you know, so on. Mm-hmm. So the options become so much wider and bigger. But the main thing is that all understanding, whichever way it comes from, because remember, even positivists is in search of understanding, just a particular type. Mm. But it can also embrace this kind.
Yeah. Okay, Richard's got a hand up, and then Tamlin. Richard?
I've had a considerable problem with the way people interpret paradigms for a long time now. The main reason is it's often portrayed as though it's entirely how you believe the world to be, because that's how it started, you know, philosophically. The implication being that either you are a positivist, or you're an interpretivist, or you are a feminist. In other words, it's who you are that determines what sort of research you want to do. And to me, that's not true, because we're all trying to do the same thing, which is find the truth, whatever the truth may be under those circumstances. And sometimes the closest approximation to the truth will come from doing a positivist research, sometimes an interpretivist research, sometimes a feminist research, but it's not entirely driven by your personal view of the world. It should be driven by your disinterested view of what approach is going to give the closest approximation to the truth in any particular setting.
I agree, and I disagree to some extent, Richard. I think I did mention that you don't have to live your paradigm, you know, so to that extent, I think that's fine. But there are paradigms which even challenge and say, so what is truth? So, you know, so if we just keep a little bit of an open mind towards that. So, yeah, these are all choices, and we make, and then we live with it in our research lives, and in how we deal with it. So yeah, let me just move to the room so that I can have a little bit more silence.
I think it's also important to know that it depends on the research question. There's certain research question where there is only one truth, like what is the color of blood? I mean, in a mammal, it's in general, you don't argue it. You can look at all the mammals and find out that it's going to be red. But then there are other people's truths, like what are the men's truths about their experiences of pain? It had to be, there were different truths that came through. There were some people that were full of bravado, even years of coming to the pain clinic, and they were still saying, you know, they're the big cheese in the house, even though the chronic pain, they've lost weight, all these kind of things. And then there were others who were crushed, their lives had been crushed. So there were different truths. So I think it really, taking from what you were saying, Richard, I think it does also depend on the question that you're going to be asking.
I think what you've just said, Colleen, when you spoke about the color of blood. So if I worked in a post-humanist paradigm in which humans are decentered, which means they're not the center of the universe or our research, and I try to identify what an animal sees the color of the blood, I don't know if I'd get a different answer, or if I get an alien, or if I have somebody who has some strange vision in which red is seen as green, and things like that. So it can be, so again, this idea, because you see, everything is structured by language. And we know that language is the most uncertain mode to capture reality. Yeah. And so I think we struggle with that, but in a way, we've kind of mastered how to do that. And I think we can live with it. So yes, paradigms, as I said, if you're in the positivist paradigm and you are there, you might not have to explain all of this because your audience understands it. But the minute you venture away from it, because there are so many more on the other side, you have to let us know which one it is.
Yeah.
You know? And just to agree with what Richard said, Richard, I work mainly in the post-structural paradigm, which is all about uncertainty, ambiguity, irony, and so on. I can't live it. I can tell you, having had a health disease in which there's so much uncertainty, I found it almost impossible to live with. So I certainly, deep down, I think I'm a positivist. I just like writing in the post-structural, paradigm. So I think those things do happen, certainly. Sorry, Colleen, I interrupted.
No, Tamlin had a question. Tamlin, you've disappeared off my screen. Are you still around?
I'm still here. Thanks,
okay,
Colleen.
Go ahead with your question.
Sure. My question was on the chat box, but just to add some experience with research in stereotypes and not masculinity. It also depends very much on who's asking the question. So like Nana said, for example, if you are a mother or caregiver who are asking that question versus a peer supporter and versus a psychologist, like you said, I mean, it depends very much on who's asking the question, which brings me to my question about data interpretation. So interpreting data from key informant interviews and focus group discussions, what tips would you give to a researcher trying to understand perceptions and experiences of participants from their point of view, and trying to sort of not place their biases into that interpretation? What tips would you give, Nana?
Okay, so firstly, because it's a perception and the experiences already biased, right? So you can't erase their biasness. They are expressing their bias as their experience. So the idea is not to get rid of it, but to write it in. Because you have to kind of acknowledge I mean, to what extent would you know? Because remember, you're not hunting for a truth. So your paradigm is telling you, if you're in a positivist, you're searching for that one truth, and you're getting closer and closer and closer to it. But in the interpretivist paradigm, you can't do that. And so if you are looking at how do you, so the question was, how do you analyze that? You need a framework of what perception is. What are the concepts? How is perception expressed? How would you identify a perception and so on? And the same with experiences. So you can't use a different theoretical tool in order to understand a phenomenon, which is what makes qualitative research so much more, how can I say, intensive, in that you not only now have to identify and name and explain your paradigm, you also have to explain your theoretical framework, because that is, your theoretical framework is influenced by your paradigm, and that will tell you how you view this. So there's an alignment between those. And we really can't deal with it right now in this short time, but perhaps we can have another session. But I hope you get that you accept biasness. It's the nature of that research. It's not something that you try and get rid of. So there's no triangulation here.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
There's another question. Elliot has asked, can we use more than one paradigm in a study? In one study?
Yes, you can, and yes, you can't. It just depends on the nature of the study. We talked about the hybrid ones. So they are definitely, there's a critical interpretivism, for example. But sometimes, like in my own PhD, I started off with a critical paradigm. And I came to the point after getting my data and analyzing, I just could not explain it. The paradigm would not allow me to, because it has certain kinds of limitations. Remember, whatever you choose has limitations. So then I had to shift the paradigm. So I had to move into post-structuralism. But then I had to write a whole big story about why I'm doing this and so on. So yes, if you can do that, certainly. But there are some studies where it just won't work. So just shifting the paradigm because it's a novelty, no. There needs to be a real stringent motivation and even an obligation to be able to do that. So I had very contradictory findings that the critical paradigm would just not allow. How do you say that teachers are victims as well as the children, as well as the parents? Because in the critical paradigm, I have to find the one that I have to work with and empower them to overcome, because the oppressors were also oppressed in all of them. So it became very complex. Who do I liberate? Who do I empower? I had to move out of that paradigm.
We've got another question from Vina. Vina, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Colleen. Lena, so good to see and hear you once again, and thank you so much. There's so much to learn. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the as we thinking about the paradigms, if you can also share, I noticed that journals now are very specific and they ask you for your reflexivity statement. And I thought maybe you can perhaps share something about that as students start to think about their publications as well. And obviously, I think that will be linked to your interpretivist paradigm of the qualitative data. Thank you.
Yeah, so reflexivity is really now, you have to explore what role you are playing as implicated in the production of data and so on. So for example, if I want to understand the experiences of women in a war zone, and it might be, say, somewhere in Africa, I now have to reflect very, very carefully whether I am the right person to be there in terms of so it doesn't mean I can't do the research, I can do it. But when it comes to the field work, I have to reflect on who I am. Do I represent them? Will I be able to understand them? Are there cultural differences which will prevent me from understanding their points of view and so on? So in that case, and these women, can they speak the language? Can I speak their language? And if I can't, I then find the field worker who most kind of reflects the participants, that makes the participants comfortable to share their stories and so on. But the idea is not because you want secret stories. That's a different ballgame related to ethics and so on, but really to provide them with a level of comfort in which they can express themselves, talk about their culture to somebody who understands and will interpret it. So, you know, at the moment, there's this going around at some of the schools where groups of girls are talking about their ancestors, visiting them, and, you know, they undergoing some kind of trauma and so on. And it's happening in schools where the principals and the staff are not from the same culture. So you can imagine who should be speaking to those children and those parents with respect. So reflexivity is to really reflect on who you are, whether you are the right person, and in some way, how do you influence the data? In my own PhD, the stories of sadness that came from the students, I felt was deeply influenced by a story that I spoke to them about myself. I was trying to give them an example of what I want from them. And I feel in some way that's the reason happy stories did not come through at all. So, and I declared that in the study. I declared that. So papers, yeah, some journals want it, and mainly related to, I think, self-study work, autobiography, ethnography, and so on. And perhaps even in feminist studies and so on. So, yeah, but reflexivity is a whole big thing again, perhaps, which needs its own workshop or seminar.
There's another question in the chat. Will I be correct to use the words paradigm and perspective interchangeably? This got me thinking in a case where I have to express research idea, a way things are. I can't see this any further. Can somebody else go down? Can you see the question? Because
I can't see it, okay, but I got the gist of it, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be careful. You have to always qualify. Perhaps it's a worldview perspective or a research perspective. Because if you just use perspective, then it could be anybody's and so on. But I think it's how you write it, not the word that you actually use. So it's really hard to speculate whether it's correct or incorrect.
Yeah.
You read it in context.
Rera, I see you've also asked a question. When the question gets very long, let me just see if I can do it this way. Is this how it works? You can discover a drug that cures cancer in a positive study, but it may not cure cancer due to a phenomenon, maybe non-adherence, that only can be understood through an interpretive study, or doesn't cure cancer in women due to maybe something with their gender, only discovered through feminist study.
So maybe it's not that it doesn't cure cancer, but you're talking about its efficacy or its usefulness with some populations or the other. Because a cure remains, right? It can cure a particular kind of cancer. It doesn't matter who the person is. Of course, there is the other idea which says that a drug will work if you believe it works, or an intervention will work if you believe, and if you don't, then it doesn't, you know. So there are all those complicating factors. But certainly it means that the first study, which is finding the cure, leads to the next step as to why does it work sometimes and why does it not work other times? So yes.
So definitely, I think the point that she was making is particular in, I've seen a lot of studies in diabetes where we know that there are certain drugs that work. Why do some people not get better? And if you have a look, there's non-adherence problems. Richard, you've got your hand up again.
No, I agree fully with Raya. I think she's absolutely right. The point she's making is when you start your research, you've got to define your terms. What do you mean by cure? And if you mean that given to people under ideal circumstances and they take it, they get better, that's fine. If on the other hand, you mean give it to everybody, will they all get better? Then you're defining cure differently, in terms of the individual. And I think Raya is making the point that we're always trying to make for people. Don't have a simplistic understanding of what a word like cure means. And in the clinical situation, it's highly applicable. Those of us who think about what we do are forever trying to point out to our students that even if a drug is known to work under ideal circumstances, you've achieved nothing if you give it to somebody and they don't take it. They don't get better, they still die, they're not cured. So it's an excellent point that Raya is bringing up.
Yeah. No, and that's fantastic because you can see we're trying to clarify what the question should be. I tried, but I'm not from the medical field. And Richard came in and then gave a better clarification of it. And that is why it is so important when you are constructing your question or this big question that you're going into the study, is to discuss it with some critical thinkers who will help you to shape it and get it in a way that is doable and researchable. Yeah, thank you for that.
There was another, Simangele, you had a hand up and gone. Did you put your hand up accidentally or are you still around to ask your question? Okay, I think it might have been an accidental hands up. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Simangele. Please pose your question. You're on mute. Okay, we've reached our hour. Naina, I cannot thank you enough again, just giving us as a group a taste of the other research paradigms that are out there. And it's literally, it was just a taste. I know how big this gets. And I think we've got to sit down one day and work out which ones are particularly appropriate to start off with in clinical research. And if I may reiterate from what you've said before, if there are any students who are interested in looking at a different research question that could be answered using a qualitative approach, which means there are many more paradigms in the qualitative than the quantitative approach. We can always set up a chat with Naina or Professor Amin.
Well, no, Naina, fine.
Yeah. Good, thank you again, Naina, and thanks for everybody who's participated, those who posed the questions. The questions helped us all to learn a bit more. And we'll all see you next week. I don't have this up. I know that Professor Emil Cormith will be speaking to us next week, and I think it might be on ethics. So thanks everybody again for attending. You do know that these sessions are recorded and they are on the UKZN YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours. Thank you again, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.